They haven't seen her in 7 years, my stepmother said to the mediator, her voice measured, almost sympathetic. She made her choices. We respected that. My father nodded beside her, hands folded on the table. The business was built without her. The updated agreement simply reflects that. The mediator glanced down at the documents in front of him. Then he looked up at me. I hadn't spoken yet. I hadn't moved. I sat with my back straight, my hands resting open on the table, the way you learn to sit when you've spent years in rooms where composure is the only currency that matters. He studied me for a moment longer than seemed necessary. Then he said something that made my father's attorney stop mid-sentence. Before we proceed, the mediator said quietly, I want to confirm something for the record. He turned toward opposing counsel. Are you aware of who you're sitting across from? The attorney looked up. His pen went still. My stepmother's smile didn't disappear. It just became something else. I already knew what was coming. I had known for months. I had prepared for exactly this moment the way I had prepared for every moment that mattered in my life quietly, thoroughly, without announcing myself in advance. The boardroom at Hargreaves Family Mediation Services in Toronto smelled the way most serious rooms do. Old carpet, recycled air, the faint trace of coffee that had been sitting too long. 3 windows faced east. The morning light came in flat and practical, the kind of light that doesn't flatter anyone. My father sat to my left, close enough that I could hear him breathing. He wore the charcoal suit he always chose for formal occasions, the one that made him look like someone who managed things reasonably. He had been managing things reasonably for as long as I could remember. It was how he operated. Quiet adjustments, careful language. He never raised his voice. He never needed to. My stepmother sat beside him, her posture precise, a leather portfolio open in front of her. She had come prepared. She always did. In the 12 years since she had moved into our house in Oakville, I had never once seen her unprepared for a room she had chosen to enter. Their attorney, a man named Brandt, sat at the end of the table. He was competent. I had researched him. He specialized in estate restructuring and family business disputes, which told me everything I needed to know about how my father and stepmother had framed this situation to themselves. My own counsel, a woman named Diane, sat beside me. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. We had already been through everything twice. The mediator, a man in his 60s named Tremblay, opened the session with the standard language. He explained the purpose, the process, the expected conduct. My father's side nodded along. They had been in rooms like this before. Then Brandt began. He spoke about the family business, a mid-sized logistics company my grandfather had started in Hamilton in the 80s, the kind of company that kept its head down, served its clients well, and grew steadily without anyone writing articles about it. My father had taken over when my grandfather retired. I had grown up inside that company the way some children grow up inside churches or kitchens. It was the texture of everything. Brandt spoke about the shareholder agreement, the one that had been updated 3 years earlier, the one that had removed my name from the succession plan. He spoke about my absence, about the fact that I had not been involved in daily operations for 7 years. He used the word disengaged 4 times. He used family alignment twice. He never once said that I had left because I had been pushed. My stepmother interjected once, gently. We always hoped she would come back, she said. But the business needed stability. We couldn't wait indefinitely. She made it sound like patience. It wasn't patience. It was paperwork. The first time I understood what was happening, I was 24 years old, sitting in my car in the parking lot of a Tim Hortons on the QEW, reading an email that had been forwarded to me by mistake. It was an internal memo. My stepmother had sent it to my father and their accountant. It outlined a proposed restructuring of the shareholder agreement. My name appeared twice in the document, both times in the same phrase, non-participating beneficiary, to be transitioned out upon next review. I sat in that parking lot for 40 minutes. I read the document 3 times. Then I drove home, made dinner, and didn't tell anyone what I had seen. That was the moment I understood that what I had been interpreting as drift, the slow cooling of conversations, the way decisions were made without my input, the subtle reorientation of the company's internal language away from anything that reminded anyone of my mother, was not drift at all. It was direction. It just moved quietly enough that you could mistake it for weather. My mother had built half of that company, not as a figurehead, as a partner. She had managed client relationships, hired the operations team, negotiated the first major contract that took the business from regional to national. When she got sick, she handed those responsibilities off carefully. She documented everything. She left instructions. She did not leave a mess. She died when I was 21. Breast cancer, 18 months from diagnosis to end. She handled it the way she handled everything, with organization and an almost unfair amount of grace. After she died, the house changed. Slowly at first, the way light changes in a room when someone moves a lamp, then all at once. My stepmother arrived 14 months later. My father introduced her as a friend. Within 6 months, she was at family dinners. Within a year, she had moved in. I was 23. I had my own apartment by then, my own life taking shape, and I told myself it didn't matter. That my father deserved to be happy. That the house was his. But the company was not just his. And that took longer for me to understand. I didn't leave in anger. I want to be clear about that, because the story they told was that I walked away, that I chose distance, that my absence was a form of protest or immaturity. I left because I was given a choice that was not really a choice. My stepmother, 2 years after moving in, joined the board. My father nominated her. The vote was 3-1. I was the one. After that, decisions moved differently. Projects my mother had championed were quietly wound down. The operational documentation my mother had built was archived and replaced with new systems. A photograph of my mother and my grandfather that had hung in the front office for 11 years was moved to a storage room because, as my stepmother explained, they were modernizing the aesthetic. I asked for it to be put back. My father said he'd look into it. He never did. I stopped going into the office the following spring. Not because I gave up. Because I understood that presence, under those conditions, was not influence. It was just proximity to something being taken. I moved to Vancouver. I built my own career. I specialized in supply chain consulting, which meant that within 4 years I had clients across Western Canada and a reputation in an industry that is small enough that everyone knows everyone eventually. I did not announce what I was doing. I did not post about it. I simply worked. My father and I spoke occasionally. Brief calls, careful conversations, the kind where both people say something and mean something slightly different. He asked how I was. I told him. He did not ask about work. I did not offer. My stepmother and I did not speak at all. 3 years ago, my grandfather got sick. He was in his mid-80s, sharp until the end, but his body had made its decision. He called me himself. He still had my number memorized. "I need to tell you something," he said, "before they tell you something else." He explained what had happened to the shareholder agreement. He had found out later than he should have. He was no longer on the board, had stepped back 5 years earlier, trusted that things were being managed the way he had always managed them, which was with accountability and transparency. They had not been managed that way. "Your name was supposed to stay on that document," he said. His voice was quiet but exact. "Your mother and I agreed on that before she died. There is a record of that conversation. Written down. Witnessed." He told me where to find it. 2 months later, he was gone. I sat in the second row at the funeral in Hamilton. My father was in the first row. My stepmother was beside him. There was no seat with my name on it. I had driven 6 hours to be there, and I stood at the graveside in November wind, and I did not cry until I was back in my car on the highway, and then I allowed myself exactly 20 minutes before I stopped. Grief is not a weakness, but it is not a strategy either. I had work to do. The first person I contacted was not a lawyer. It was my grandfather's former assistant, a woman named Carol who had worked for him for 19 years and who, it turned out, had been present for the conversation he had described. We spoke for 2 hours. She was precise, careful, and angry in the way that people who work in quiet loyalty for a long time become angry when they see what they helped build being rewritten. She sent me copies of 3 documents. A written record of a shareholder meeting from 12 years ago. A letter of intent my mother had drafted and filed with the company's legal counsel, and an email chain between my grandfather and the company's original lawyer, establishing that my standing in the succession plan was not contingent on active operational involvement, but on being my mother's daughter and my grandfather's granddaughter. I read all 3 documents the same night they arrived. I made 2 copies of each, stored 1 set physically and 1 digitally, in separate locations. Then I called Diane. She had been recommended to me by a colleague in Toronto, a man who described her as someone who doesn't perform in courtrooms, she operates in them. That sounded right to me. When we met for the first time, she asked me what I wanted. I told her I wanted the record corrected. She raised an eyebrow. Not compensation? Accuracy, I said. And then whatever follows from accuracy. She nodded slowly. That changes the approach. I know, I said. That's why I said it that way. We didn't shake hands dramatically. We just started working. In the months before the mediation, I kept my routine. Client work, early mornings, long runs along the seawall. I reviewed documents the way I had learned to review complex logistics proposals linearly, then backwards, checking for gaps between what was stated and what was implied. What I found was consistent with what I expected. The updated shareholder agreement had been drafted by my stepmother's personal attorney, not the company's legal counsel. It had been executed during a period when my grandfather was traveling and not reviewing internal documents. My father had signed it. The board had approved it in a meeting that had lasted 11 minutes, according to the minutes on file. 11 minutes to remove someone from a company their mother had helped build. I did not confront anyone. I did not send emails or make calls. I watched the patterns in the paperwork the way you watch water to understand how a landscape is draining. Eventually, you can see exactly which way everything is flowing and where it came from. My father called me in February, 2 months before the mediation date. He called from his cell, which was unusual. He usually communicated through his assistant. I hear you've engaged legal representation, he said. I have. A pause. This doesn't need to be formal. It already is, I said. It became formal the moment someone filed paperwork. He exhaled. You've been out of the business for years. The agreement reflects that. The agreement reflects a decision that was made without the information it was required to consider, I said. That's different. Your mother would have wanted the family to be together, he said. It was the line I had been waiting for, the one that was supposed to end the conversation. My mother would have wanted the company run with integrity, I replied. She wrote that down. You should read it again. The call ended shortly after. That night I sat at my desk with the documents spread out in front of me and I thought about her, about the way she used to go over contracts line by line at the kitchen table, underlining things with a pencil, making notes in the margins. About how she told me once that the most important thing in any agreement was not what it said, but what it assumed without saying. She had been right about that. The mediation session continued. Brandt finished his opening summary. He was thorough. He covered all the expected ground: my absence, the operational needs of the business, the board's decision-making authority, the legality of the agreement as executed. He did not mention the letter of intent. He did not mention the shareholder meeting from 12 years ago. He did not mention Carol. When it was Diane's turn, she did not make a speech. She asked 3 questions. Who had retained the attorney who drafted the updated agreement? My stepmother's name appeared in the answer. Who had been present at the 11-minute board meeting? The answer confirmed that my grandfather had not been notified. And who, Diane asked, had reviewed the original conditions attached to the succession clause, the conditions that had been established when the company was first incorporated? Brandt hesitated. My stepmother spoke to him quietly. My father looked at the table. Tremblay looked up. I'll need a response to that question on the record, he said. Brandt said that he had not reviewed the original incorporation documents as part of his preparation. Tremblay wrote something down. Diane submitted the 3 documents. No ceremony. Just a clear, organized stack placed in front of the mediator with index tabs. Tremblay reviewed them. He took his time. The room was quiet the way rooms get when the people in them understand that what's happening is no longer procedural. My father turned his head toward me. I kept my eyes forward. Counsel, Tremblay said finally, addressing Brandt, I want to return to something. Before we continue, I'd like to establish the full professional background of the petitioning party for the record. He looked at Diane. Please proceed. Diane turned to me. Can you describe your current professional role? I'm the founder and principal consultant of a supply chain advisory firm, I said. We operate primarily across British Columbia and Alberta, with federal contracts in infrastructure logistics. And your client portfolio? I named 3 of them. The third name, a national distribution company with contracts across 6 provinces, made Brandt look up from his notes. Because that company was one of the firm's largest active clients. The contract my father's business was currently trying to renew. My stepmother understood it first. I watched it register in her face, not panic, something quieter and more final, like a door being closed from the other side. My father sat very still. I had not engineered this to make a point. I had not arranged my career to arrive at this moment. But I had also not hidden it. It had simply never occurred to them to ask. They had written a version of me that ended when I left Oakville, and that version did not include the past 7 years. Tremblay looked at opposing counsel. "Are you telling this table," he said, very evenly, "that in preparing this case, you did not research the current professional standing of the other party?" Brant said nothing useful. Tremblay closed the folder in front of him. "We'll take a 15-minute recess." In the hallway, the carpet was the kind of beige that is given up. A water cooler hummed in the corner. Somewhere down the hall, another family was conducting a different version of the same conversation. Diane stood beside me. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, that landed. "I know. You could have led with it." "No," I said. "I couldn't have." She considered that. "Because it would have looked like leverage." "Because it wasn't relevant until they made it relevant," I said. "They defined me as someone who had disengaged. I needed the record to show them what disengagement had actually looked like from my end." She nodded once. "Fair." Across the hall, my stepmother was speaking rapidly to Brant. My father stood apart, arms crossed, looking at nothing in particular. He looked like a man revising something, not his position, his understanding of the situation. That was new. When the session resumed, the atmosphere had changed. Brant's language shifted from declarative to conditional. He began using phrases like, "if the original documentation supports," and "pending further review." My stepmother's folder stayed closed. Tremblay asked my father one question directly. "When the shareholder agreement was updated, were you made aware of the letter of intent filed by your late wife's legal counsel?" My father was quiet for a moment. "I was told it wasn't binding," he said. "By whom?" He glanced at my stepmother. She looked straight ahead. "I was advised that it didn't need to be incorporated," he said. Tremblay wrote this down. He was methodical, careful, the kind of man who understood that what was written in a room outlasted everything said in it. "Let the record reflect," he said, "that the documentation provided by the petitioner's counsel establishes a prior and explicit intention regarding her standing in the family business. Let the record further reflect that this documentation was not disclosed in the opposing party's submissions, despite its direct relevance to the matter at hand." He looked up. "This mediation will be adjourned pending a full review of the original incorporation documents and shareholder conditions. The petitioner's standing will be recognized throughout that review process." He closed his folder. "The record," he said, "does not disappear because it's inconvenient." The building emptied with the particular quiet of a place where serious things had just been decided. No raised voices, no dramatics. Just the sound of briefcases, the mechanical sigh of elevator doors. I stood outside on King Street for a moment. It was a cold afternoon, the kind of March day in Toronto that hasn't decided yet whether it's winter or spring. The air had a clarity to it that I appreciated. Diane came to stand beside me. "That went well," she said. "It went accurately," I said. She smiled at that. "How are you feeling?" I considered the question. "Ready for the next part?" "That's not what I asked." I looked at her. "I know." We stood there for a moment. Down the street, a streetcar moved through the gray light. Someone's coffee cup blew off a ledge and tumbled across the sidewalk. "She built something real," I said. I didn't clarify who. Diane didn't ask. "She did," she said simply. That was enough. The review took 6 weeks. The kind of 6 weeks that look quiet from the outside: emails, document requests, certified copies, phone calls conducted in careful professional language, but feel, from the inside, like the slow work of correcting something that has been out of alignment for a long time. Carol testified in writing. Her statement was 4 pages, single-spaced, specific. She did not editorialize. She simply described what she had witnessed and what had been recorded, and she noted where the subsequent paperwork had diverged from those records. The results of the review were not a surprise to me. They shouldn't have been a surprise to anyone who had read the original documents. But surprises, I had learned, are usually just facts that someone hoped would be forgotten. My name was restored to the succession plan. The amended shareholder agreement was set aside. The company's legal counsel, not my stepmother's personal attorney, was appointed to oversee the restructuring. I accepted my standing. I did not request a seat on the board. What I requested was an independent audit of the past 3 years of operations, which was granted, and the appointment of a neutral executor to manage my interests going forward, which was also granted. Some people expected me to push further, to demand apologies, board positions, a public accounting of what had been done. I understood the impulse. But I had learned a long time ago that what you reach for after a win tells people who you are more than the win itself. I reached for accuracy, for my mother's name to be restored in the company's formal history, listed properly in the founding documentation the way it had been before someone decided she was better forgotten. For a scholarship established through the company's charitable arm, directed toward young women in logistics and operations management across Ontario, those things were granted. My father called me on a Sunday evening in April. The city was doing that thing it does in spring, determined, slightly messy, optimistic in spite of itself. I almost didn't answer. Then I did. "I owe you an explanation," he said. I waited. "She told me it was cleaner," he said, "to remove the active complexity from the agreement. That's what she called it, active complexity." He paused. I should have asked what she meant. It wasn't an apology. Not entirely. But it was something more than what I expected, which was nothing. "You knew about the letter," I said. It wasn't a question. A long pause. I was told it was outdated. "It was dated and witnessed," I said. "Those are the things that make documents valid. I know that now." I looked out my window. A couple was walking a dog below, the dog pulling ahead the way dogs always do, convinced there's something urgent just around the corner. "She spent years on that company," I said. "She didn't do that so her name could be moved to a storage room." "No," he said quietly. "She didn't." We didn't talk for much longer after that. We didn't make plans to have dinner or rebuild something from scratch. Some things don't get rebuilt, they get stabilized. What we had was no longer broken in the same way it had been looked at honestly, which is a different kind of repair. Before he hung up, he said, "You handle yourself the way she did." I didn't answer right away. "I know," I said eventually. "I learned it from her." A few months later, on a clear September afternoon in Vancouver, I went for a run along the seawall. It was one of those days when the mountains come in close, and the water looks like something from a different part of the world, and you understand why people move here and stay. I thought about my mother. About the way she approached a room full of people who underestimated her, not with performance, not with the need to announce herself, just with preparation and the patience to let the truth do the work eventually. She had understood something that takes most people years to learn. That the people who believe they can revise history always make the same mistake. They assume the only copy is the one they hold. They forget about the witnesses. They forget about the filing cabinets. They forget about the granddaughter who was paying attention. I hadn't gone through this to make a point. I hadn't done it for money or for the satisfaction of watching someone else lose. I had done it because a record had been altered, and records are how we know who was here, what they built, and what they meant for it to become. My mother was here. She built something real. She meant for it to include me. That's written down now, in a county office in Hamilton, in the minutes of a mediation session in Toronto, and in the name of a scholarship that will exist long after everyone in that boardroom has been forgotten. If you've ever been quietly written out of something that should have included you, a company, a family, a story, I want you to hear this. You don't have to make a scene to make a correction. You don't have to destroy something to restore what belongs in it. You just have to be precise, be patient, and refuse to accept someone else's version of you simply because they filed it first. The most powerful thing in any dispute is not the loudest argument. It's the document no one thought to check. It's the witness no one thought to ask. It's the person in the room that everyone assumed had already been handled. I was that person, and I came prepared. If this story stayed with you, I'd be glad to hear what it brought up for you. There are a lot of people out there carrying quiet battles, the kind that don't look dramatic from the outside but cost something real on the inside. If that's you, feel free to share your thoughts below. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, stories about patience, precision, and people who refuse to disappear, consider subscribing and staying with us. Thank you for listening.